What's up, guys? Flaming Geek here, and here is my spoiler review of Star Trek Beyond. First of all, I just want to say, go see this movie! Go see it! It is really well done, and it blew away my expectations. A little bit of background. I am a huge Star Trek fan. I'm a huge fan of the original series. It's my favorite series out of all the Star Trek series. And so, of course, I was excited to see this film. I enjoyed the 2009 J.J. Abrams reboot of the Star Trek film. Star Trek Into Darkness, kind of a love-hate relationship with that. I love it for Benedict Cumberbatch, and that's kind of pretty much it. That, for me, was not a well-done Star Trek movie. It's actually on my lower list. I'm one of the few people who didn't really enjoy it, because it didn't do anything to improve or take the new franchise, this reboot, anywhere else that, like, the original series hadn't done. So, Star Trek Beyond, I was a little iffy about it, but I started to get excited for it when it was announced a year and a half ago that J.J. Abrams would not be directing it. That made me excited. As much as I love J.J. Abrams, he's really good at rebooting franchises. We've seen this with Star Trek, Star Wars, Mission Impossible 3. I kind of think that is a reboot because of its gap time between first Mission Impossible 2 and 3. So he's really good at that. And he's good at producing TV shows. But, like, from Star Trek Into Darkness, it was clear that it didn't do anything to improve the lore and the source material, which is what every movie should do. And I was tired of seeing the Enterprise getting destroyed and just events happening on Earth, because I want to see them boldly go where no man has gone before. So when it was announced that Justin Lin would be directing it, I thought, okay, this is cool, because I actually like the Fast and Furious movies, and I like the Fast and Furious movie he directed. But the moment where I was really on board was when it was announced that Simon Pegg and Doug Jung would be writing this film. I am a huge, diehard Simon Pegg fan. I absolutely love Spaced. It's one of my all-time favorite TV shows, and I recommend it to anyone who's never seen it. Go watch that. If you're a huge geek and a nerd like me, go see Spaced. It encapsulates video game fans, science fiction fans, fantasy fans, everything. It's so well done. And I love the Cornetto trilogy, and I just love Simon Pegg's writing capabilities. And just from being familiar and a fan of his work, I know very well that he is a huge Star Trek fan. He's a diehard Trekkie. And he was pretty vocal about his opinion on Star Trek Into Darkness. So the moment when he got on board and said he was going to write this, I had a feeling that this was going to be good. It was going to be written from a fan. And what better way to encapsulate love for Star Trek and what Star Trek is than having a diehard fan write it, especially a very strong writer. But the two trailers that they released were kind of The first one was and a lot of people were like, oh, this looks dumb, it doesn't look good. And the second one was like, this is better than the first one. But the second one got me super excited, especially seeing like the saucer portion of the Enterprise and seeing a little bit more of the characters. But there wasn't much promotion done for this film. But anyways, 50th anniversary of Star Trek, so I went to go see it a couple of days before opening night. And I loved it. It was so well done. This is a spoiler review, so I'll just go through from beginning to end. So the film opens up with something that we needed to see in this reboot. Captain Kirk going and trying to be diplomatic and create diplomatic ties with other planets within the Federation. We actually get to see this happen, and it's done comedically well with those aliens. I don't remember their names specifically. That was really well done. And the movie moves on to a starbase, which is really neat because we haven't seen a starbase in the reboot films. We vaguely got to see them in the original Star Trek movies, but the ones we saw in the original Star Trek movies, it was mostly just to house starships and stuff. This is an actual starbase where people live on it, and it's way out in the frontier of space near a nebula, which is something of which Starfleet has never gone into. They've sent probes into nebulas, and I liked that tie-in with the original franchise about the idea of beyond the impossible into this nebula, which we kind of got to see in Star Trek V. Anyways, so this movie had amazing CGI. It was really, really good CGI. The exception would be later on in the film when you see Kirk on this motorcycle. That looked kind of weird, the CGI on that. But the rest of it, the CGI was beautiful, like breathtaking. It's going to be a couple of years, maybe 5 or 6 years before it starts to look a little dated. But it was well done. It was quality CGI, and it looked amazing on IMAX. So a distress signal and a destroyed ship arrives. This captain named Kalara of a different alien species arrives, and she tells the Federation that her crew is stranded and their ship was attacked within the beyond the nebula along the frontier, and they need a ship that's capable to go back and save her crew on this planet. And so, of course, the Enterprise is the most technologically advanced ship besides the current starship being constructed. And of course, Kirk says, "Let's go," and he goes. Little bit of you see a little bit of a struggle with Kirk internally. He has applied for the position of Vice Admiral, which I thought was kind of weird because in Starfleet, if I remember correctly, you need to be a captain for more than 5 years to apply to be Admiral, and then you can be Vice Admiral. So I was kind of like, that's a little weird, but okay. And meanwhile, we find out, and this is what I was worried. I was really curious to see how the franchise would treat the death of the ever so amazing Leonard Nimoy. And it was really well done. 2 Vulcans go and they tell Spock about Ambassador Spock, or Spock Prime's, that he's passed away. And you just see a picture of Spock Prime there, and it's got his birth date to his death date. And that was really sweet. Like, there wasn't anything that needed to be said. And I was like, thank you. That's one thing that this movie really does well, is you can tell it was written by a Star Trek fan. There's so many calls out to the original series and little Easter eggs. Kirk and his crew, they go beyond the nebula, and unfortunately they run into this really neat ship that is made up, it's a swarm, made up of thousands of other little ships that is controlled by one ship. And it sends an attack wave. They cannot hail this ship. And of course, the Enterprise gets destroyed. But the way how the Enterprise gets destroyed in this one, this was cool. Because those ships were awesome. Like the B formation, and how the attacks were done, and how they would breach the hull, and they'd have soldiers ready to come out. That was neat. That was a really creative way of destroying the Enterprise. A way that I can get behind of, because I am tired of the Enterprise getting destroyed in the reboot franchise. So I hope for the next film, Star Trek IV, please do not destroy the Enterprise. Because in the original films, it doesn't get destroyed that often. If you think about it, it's like 4 out of 7 films, which I guess that's still quite a lot. The ship gets destroyed, and Kirk tells his crew to it was time to abandon ship. So his crew heads out to the planet on escape pods, but they get taken away by the enemies of this assaulting enemies of the assaulting ships. And Kirk, of course, has to leave the Enterprise, which is sad, and you get to see it enter the atmosphere, the disk. And then that's where this movie really starts. The destruction of the Enterprise and such, that's like the first half hour of the movie. It's very quick. But I liked that it was the half hour and not like the finale, like Into Darkness. Anyways, this is something that we get to finally see. We get to see the Enterprise and its crew on a planet. Like actually doing Star Trek exploration on a planet, which we haven't seen so far in this reboot franchise, which I absolutely loved. I loved the cinematography, and I love the locations they shot at. And being a Canadian, I was super proud because I was like, that's BC, that's somewhere in Quebec, and like it was nice to see new locations and a new planet. It's a Class M planet, which they land on. Kirk, Scotty eventually finds this alien named Jayla who saves him, and we soon learn that she's stranded on the planet as well because of the alien commander Krall, who's played by Idris Elba. Jayla's played by Sofia Boutella, and she does an amazing job. That's basically most of the film. It's Kirk trying. The majority of the film is Kirk, Chekhov, Bones, Spock, Scotty trying to get back the crew, which is being held captive by Krall. And Krall is looking for this device, this artifact. I don't remember the name of it. He's been searching for it, and it turns out it was the artifact at the beginning of the film. Kirk was using it in his negotiations at the very beginning of the film. So the film centers around the search for this artifact and Kirk getting his crew back and protecting his crew. Because when it boils down to it, that is what Star Trek is. It's a family. And that's what I really liked about this film. It really embraced that. It more so didn't deal with what was going on with the villains. It focused on the characters that are integral to Trek, the main cast of 6, which I absolutely loved. That was something I found that the other 2 films were really lacking in. We got to see Kirk and Spock, lots of Kirk, lots of Spock, a little bit of Bones, but we barely got to see Sulu, Chekhov, and Chekhov. We got to see more of Uhura, and I like the choices that they took in this film because it was apparent that criticism from the previous film was taken into account. We have very few Spock and Uhura moments, and that was great because the last film, it was overdone, and it was something like a relationship you don't need to always see on screen. It could be achieved just by simple gazes and a few exchanges of dialogue. The best writing and best character dialogue and character development was by far Bones and Spock. That was some prime Trekkie dialogue. If you watch the original series, some of the best arguments are between Spock and Bones. It's some of the most intellectual, high-level, functioning dialogue. And if it's written correctly, it can be hilarious. And it was written well. And I really like that. We got to see both of these characters grow. We got to see what the dynamics of the relationship is, which is something we didn't really get to see in the previous films. And I liked that. We got to see a lot more of Chekhov, which I love because Chekhov is one of my favorite members of the crew. And I felt in the last 2 films, especially the last one, he wasn't used at all. He had a couple sentences of dialogue. And it was sad seeing it because knowing Anton Yelchin is no longer here. He passed away due to an unfortunate accident. And so it was hard seeing that because he really did take a character like Chekhov and distinguish it separately from Walter Koenig's Chekhov. They still have integral parts in which they are both the same, and you can see connections between the 2 Chekhovs, but he really did a good job making it his own, and I loved that, and it was very sad to see him on the screen, the big screen, one last time. But it was amazing that he got more screen time. You got to see his interactions more with Kirk, which was something different that you don't get to see very often, even in the show. We got to see more of Scotty. Yes, one of my other favorite characters, and just Simon Pegg being brilliant. And Scotty primarily interacts with the character Jayla, who finally is a good, solid female Star Trek character in this reboot, which is something we don't really see that often in Star Trek in general. She was a strong character. She was very different from Dr. Marcus from the previous one, because if you remember, Dr. Marcus in the previous film, Into Darkness, was essentially eye candy. Jayla was smart, she was strong, and she was an interesting alien with a really sad backstory about how Krall took her family and her father planned an escape, and she was the only one who survived to get out of that prison. And Sofia Boutella plays her so well. She doesn't even need to overdo her acting and overdo the fact that she is an alien. And I loved the fight scenes. This Star Trek had some of the best fight choreography and camera work that I have seen to date in the Star Trek films. Her combat, and while I was watching it, I was like, wow, this is impressive. I want to see more of this character. So I really hope that she is not just a solo film character. I really want to see Jayla come back and be a member of the Enterprise crew. I would love to have a new addition character to this franchise, because that's how you build franchises. You need to add a little bit of change, and I really hope we see that in this film. In these films. And so, Crawl, the third half of the movie is essentially Kirk and Jayla and Spock and Bones busting, and Scotty and everyone else busting out Kirk's crew out of Crawl's prison camp. Which they do, which, like I said, it was kind of shaky CGI with Kirk on the motorcycle, but it was still pretty cool. The duplicate Kirks, because the holograms just, like, going around and, like, causing havoc and causing shit and stuff. That was pretty sweet. After that, the third half of the film is the climax of the film, obviously. This is where I actually enjoyed it, and some people have issues with it. They soon discover, because Crawl goes back into space, should mention, the USS Franklin. This movie is really good at ties in with original Star Trek lore. This film is so good at connecting with Star Trek lore. They brought in the USS Franklin. If you're not a Trekkie, this doesn't mean a lot to you. But if you are a Trekkie like me, I was freaking out in my seat. And I saw this movie with my brother, my two brothers. And one of them is a huge Trekkie like me. And we were literally sitting there like, oh my gosh, Enterprise. This is a call up to Enterprise. Ah, yes. This movie brings in the infamous USS Franklin that gets mentioned in Star Trek Enterprise as a ship that was one of the first ships that Starfleet built. It was built at the beginning of the creation of Starfleet, and it went missing. So we finally get to see the Franklin. I'm sorry if I'm scaring anyone, but this was huge for me. So we find out the USS Franklin actually crashed on this planet, and its ship and crew died, are gone. But we find out eventually that actually the captain and two of the his crew members actually survived, and which happens to be Crawl, the captain, who was Benjamin, who was Captain Benjamin, who fought in the Romulan Wars, which, if you remember from the original Star Trek series. And they mention that a lot in the original series, especially in Balance of Terror, because that's the first episode where you actually see a Romulan, because they'd never seen the Romulans before that. And so there's this idea of the difference in generations, a generation which knew fighting, and a generation of the current Star Trek crew, which is peace, exploration, scientific exploration. So we have this clash of two personalities. There's Franklin, aka Crawl, who was angered at Starfleet for abandoning him and his crew because they couldn't get a distress signal out because of the technology. So he and his crew perished on this planet. And he becomes Crawl. It's not too clear how he becomes Crawl. From what I can surmise from watching the film, the planet they landed on had advanced alien technology, and they left behind alien drones for the mining. And essentially, he managed to get a hold of the life-prolonging technology, which they suck out the life force of other people. And so Crawl was bringing back other aliens who were venturing close to this nebula back to his planet so that he can use their energy and also to find this artifact. But it doesn't get mentioned really how he changed. It's kind of appears like he must have used a set number of aliens that appeared like how he and his other one surviving crew member looked like. and so they eventually like changed because they were sucking the energy out. Yeah, that's one thing this movie doesn't get too involved in, which is the villain development. It's kind of a generic villain, and in a way, Idris Elba plays a really cool villain, but I kind of wish they went more into depth into it, because I love villains and I always love to learn their motivations. And so we got his motivation in the third act of the film, but it was kind of like, ugh. So you're really angry at the Federation and you're going to release a bioweapon? Okay, cool. Yeah, that sounds right. One of my favorite parts of this movie is when the Enterprise figures out, and it's in the climax of the film, that because it crawls ship formation, they follow patterns like bees, they should be able to disrupt the signal, and so they use VHS radio wave. And Jayla picks her music, and it's Sabotage, Beastie Boys' Sabotage, which I liked because if you remember in the first movie reboot, when they introduced Kirk, in the car, you hear Beastie Boys Sabotage, and that's how you get introduced to Kirk. So I really liked that. It was like call back to the original, and it fit very well because they were causing sabotage, and that was pretty sweet when it was like, why? And everything blows up, and you're like, oh yeah, listen all y'all, it's a sabotage. I really liked that. Yes. But it was like kind of the way how Crawl gets destroyed at the end, where you're kind of like, okay, that's lame. He gets sucked into space and disintegrated by the artifact and the bioweapon. I don't know, it was one of those endings where you knew it was going to happen, and it happened, and I, like, literally didn't care. It wasn't like in Into Darkness, or the 2009 one with Nero, and it's like, surrender now! And Nero's like, nope, I'm going down with my ship, I could never join you. He's like, I would rather die, witness the death of Romulus 1,000 times. I'd rather die in agony than accept assistance from you. And then Kirk's like, okay, that was cool. Or like in Into Darkness with Spock fighting Khan, and that was a really cool climax. This movie does really well at adding those tributes to Star Trek. I love the mention of Chekhov being more of a whiskey guy instead of vodka. Or no, a Scotch guy more than vodka. I love that because in the original series, Chekhov and Scotty are always butting heads. Scotch or vodka? And the Scottishman loves his Scotch and the Russian loves his vodka. And I loved it in this one. He likes his Scotch. That was pretty funny. Also, when they mentioned the Franklin, Scotty's like, oh, we assumed like they got captured by an alien race or captured by a big green hand. I love that because if you remember Season 2, Episode 2 of Star Trek, the original series, when they introduce Apollo, that's how the Enterprise gets caught. Apollo reaches out his big green hand and he grabs the Enterprise like that and they can't move. So I was freaking out. And also, when they are in the USS Franklin, Spock is putting on a uniform from Star Trek Enterprise, the show. And that was pretty cool, that they actually used, like, the retro uniforms. I loved that design. So there were so many great moments in this Star Trek movie, and I absolutely loved, and it brought tears to my eyes when, at the end of the film, Spock opens Ambassador Spock's box of memorabilia, and he pulls out, there's that tapestry, that red Vulcan tapestry, and I believe that's from Star Trek Search for Spock. But the hardest part was when he opens it and you see a picture. He opens his box and you see a picture of the original Star Trek crew. That brought tears to my eyes because, one, it made it feel even more real that Leonard Nimoy isn't here anymore, and two, I love the original series, and it was just like the perfect way to commemorate an amazing, getting emotional, an amazing group of people, actors who played such memorable characters who will live on forever in science fiction, and for people who had such a big who had such a big influence on not just me, but millions of other people in their lives. So that was a wonderful way, and I loved how the ending of the film, they say for Anton and loving memory of Leonard Nimoy. So anyways, Star Trek Beyond is a great film. Go see it. Please go see it. If you're a Star Trek fan, go see it. If you're not a Trekkie, go see it. It's a really good summer blockbuster film, and I really hope it does well because it deserves it. Because it treats the franchise with respect, and it's taking the franchise into a new direction. And I cannot wait for Star Trek 4, where they go and explore strange new worlds, seek out new life and new civilizations, and to boldly go where no one has gone before. And like always, you guys can like or comment in the description below. And as always, live long and prosper. Frosty!